part of it lies deep in the space between the ramus of the mandible and the sternocleidomastoid muscle. We'll look at the deep part first. To look at the deep part of the parotid gland, we'll start with a dissection in which the whole of the gland has been removed. This is a good opportunity to see, all in one place, a number of structures that we've learned about separately. Let's take a good look round. Here's the posterior border of the ramus of the mandible. Here's the zygomatic arch. Here's the external auditory meatus. Here's the mastoid process. Here's the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Here's the masseter muscle. Here's the space that's occupied by the deep part of the parotid gland. Here's the posterior belly of the digastric muscle lying deep to the sternocleidomastoid. Here's the styloid process and the stylohyoid muscle. Here, emerging behind the styloid process, is the trunk of an important nerve, the facial nerve. The facial nerve, which provides the motor innervation to all the muscles of facial expression, has an important relationship to the parotid gland. It runs right through it, dividing into several branches as it does so. Now that we've seen the space that's occupied by the deep part of the parotid gland, we'll add the deep part of the gland to the picture. Here's the cut surface of the parotid gland. Again, here are the sternocleidomastoid muscle, the masseter, and the ramus of the mandible. Before we add the superficial part of the parotid gland, we'll add the facial nerve to the picture. Here's the trunk of the facial nerve, entering the parotid gland from behind. The branches of the facial nerve fan out, upwards, forwards, and downwards. We'll take a more complete look at the facial nerve in the next tape in the series. Here, we're concerned only with its relationship to the parotid gland. Now we'll add the superficial part of the gland to the picture. Here it is. The superficial part of the parotid gland covers the posterior part of the masseter muscle. Its extent varies. It usually extends up as far as the zygomatic arch and down to the angle of the mandible. It can also overlap the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. The saliva that's secreted by the parotid gland passes into the parotid duct, which emerges from the anterior border of the gland and passes forward around the anterior border of the masseter. The parotid duct enters the oral cavity by passing through the buccinator muscle and through the underlying mucous membrane at about the level of the second upper molar tooth. Next, we'll look at the submandibular gland. The submandibular gland lies under the posterior part of the body of the mandible. We'll start by looking at a dissection in which the gland has been removed. Again, we'll take the opportunity to review the bony and muscular anatomy. Here's the body of the mandible. Here's the body of the hyoid bone. Here's the anterior belly of the digastric. Here's the digastric tendon passing through the stylohyoid muscle. Here's the mylohyoid muscle. Here's the styloglossus. Here, deep to the digastric, is the hyoglossus muscle. Now we'll add the submandibular gland to the picture. Here it is. The submandibular gland curls around behind the free border of the mylohyoid muscle, so that it has a superficial part, which we can see here, and a deep part. To see the deep part, we'll remove the superficial part. Here's the cut edge of the deep part of the submandibular gland, between the mylohyoid and styloglossus muscles. It extends forward to about here. The saliva that's produced by the submandibular gland passes into the submandibular duct, which runs forwards in the floor of the mouth. To see the duct, and also to see the third salivary gland, the sublingual gland, we'll look at a specimen consisting of the mandible, the tongue, and the floor of the mouth. We'll remove the alveolar process, and we'll remove the mucous membrane. Here, just beneath the mucous membrane, is the sublingual gland, which we'll see in a moment. For now, we'll remove it too, to see the submandibular duct. The submandibular duct runs forward in the floor of the mouth, alongside the base of the tongue. It ends here, just beside the frenum. To see where it starts, we'll go round to the back. Here's the submandibular duct. Here's the submandibular gland. The duct passes forward in the interval between the mylohyoid muscle and the muscles of the side of the tongue, the hyo and styloglossus muscles. Now, we'll go round to the front again and put the sublingual gland back in the picture. The sublingual gland is thin, flat, and somewhat diffuse. It lies alongside the base of the tongue, just lateral to the genioglossus muscle. The saliva formed by the sublingual gland enters the oral cavity by way of several very small openings in the mucous membrane of the floor of the mouth. The openings are too small to see here. Now that we've looked at the salivary glands, we'll move on to complete our picture of the structures around the oral cavity by looking at the pharynx. To understand the lower part of the pharynx, we need to look at two important structures that we haven't seen yet, the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage. The thyroid cartilage is here, below the hyoid bone. The cricoid cartilage is here, just below the thyroid cartilage. Here are the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage together. The cricoid cartilage is partly enclosed by the larger thyroid cartilage. We'll look at the thyroid cartilage first. The thyroid cartilage consists of two slightly curved plates, the laminae. The laminae are joined together in front. They're widely separated behind. The laminae meet at an angle of 120 degrees in the female, 90 degrees in the male. This is a female specimen. In the male, the thyroid cartilage projects forwards, giving rise to the laryngeal prominence, also known as the Adam's apple. Above, the two laminae meet in a V-shaped notch, the superior thyroid notch, that's easy to feel, just above the laryngeal prominence. On the sides of the lamina are two projections, the superior and inferior tubercles. They're joined by this slight ridge, the oblique line, which is a major muscle attachment, as we'll see. The posterior border of each lamina is prolonged upward and downward to form two projections, the superior horn and the inferior horn. The superior horn points upwards and backwards, the inferior horn points downwards. The thyroid cartilage hangs directly below the hyoid bone. The upper border of the thyroid cartilage has the same curvature as the arch of the hyoid bone. The thyroid cartilage is suspended from the hyoid bone by this membrane, the thyrohyoid membrane. On each side, the posterior part of the membrane is thickened, forming the lateral thyrohyoid ligament. The inferior horn of the thyroid cartilage articulates with the cricoid cartilage at the cricothyroid joint. Unlike the thyroid cartilage, which is open at the back, the cricoid cartilage forms a complete ring. Let's look at the cricoid cartilage by itself. It's much taller behind than in front. The narrow part in front is the arch. The tall part behind is the lamina. The inferior horn of the thyroid cartilage articulates here. Below, the cricoid cartilage is continuous with the upper end of the trachea. The cricoid and thyroid cartilages form the framework for the larynx. We'll see them in that context in the next section of this tape. We're concerned with them in this section because they also give attachment to some important muscles of the lower part of the pharynx. Now that we've seen them, let's look at the pharynx. To get a view of the pharynx from the side, we'll start with a dissection in which all the neck muscles are present. The only part